Before the first word was ever spoken, there was only the breath of the wind moving through endless grass. The world was still nameless, then a silence so complete it seemed to hum. Mists rolled over valleys no human eye had yet seen, and the stars hung lower, like ancient sentinels keeping watch over a planet that had not yet learned to dream. There were no empires, no firelight stories, no written prayers carved into stone. Only motion, only instinct, only the quiet persistence of life trying to understand itself. In that deep twilight of prehistory, the earth was not empty, it was crowded with potential. Forests older than imagination stretched across continents. Beasts with eyes the size of fists roamed through shadows, and somewhere among them moved creatures who were not yet us, but not entirely different either. They walked upright, knuckles brushing bark, watching the horizon as if waiting for something unnamed to arrive. They didn't call themselves Neanderthal, Denisovan, or Homo erectus. They had no names, no language to bind thought to sound. But they knew. They knew the sharpness of hunger, the warmth of shelter, the rhythm of seasons, and the invisible thread between light and survival. Imagine a mother of that age sitting in a cave as snow fell against the mouth of stone. She presses her child to her chest and listens, not for words, but for the slow breathing of the world. Her heart beats in time with the wind outside, and in that rhythm, an awareness stirs. The beginnings of thought, of self, of fear and wonder intertwined. Somewhere in the depths of her mind flickers the first spark of curiosity. What lies beyond this night? Intelligence did not arrive like lightning. It was a slow, trembling dawn. Across millennia, countless species rose and vanished, each carrying a fragment of what we now call mind. The bones of those forgotten cousins rest beneath our feet, scattered like pages from a lost manuscript. Some shaped stones into tools, others crafted shelters of branches and hide. They learned to recognize faces, to follow tracks, to comfort the dying. Their world was brutal, yet filled with moments of quiet grace, gestures that hinted at something more than survival. We are told that only one lineage endured, that the others faded because we were stronger, faster, smarter. But perhaps that's not the truth. Perhaps we survived because we remembered. Because something within us refused to forget the ones who came before. Their strength became our memory. Their instincts became the scaffolding of our soul. Even now, traces of their lives live inside us in the way we seek warmth, the way we fear the dark, the way we look up at the stars and feel something we cannot name. The earth itself was different then. Rivers carved new paths every season, and mountains were still young, their bones not yet settled. Fire leapt from the ground in places, and the air carried the scent of rain mixed with ash. Life was both fragile and fierce, held in balance by chance. To survive meant to listen not just to the cry of the hawk or the snap of a twig, but to the pulse beneath the soil. The first beings who would one day become human didn't conquer nature, they merged with it. Their thoughts were not separate from the land but born of it, shaped by it, like the wind shaping the dunes. If you could step back into that age, you might not recognize them, but they might recognize you. In your heartbeat, your hunger, your quiet need to understand, they would find something familiar. You are their echo, a continuation of an ancient question that has never stopped being asked. Every breath you take carries the memory of that world before words, when existence was its own language. And yet, something was beginning to stir. Within that silence, small fires started to appear, tiny flickers of awareness lighting the vast dark. Eyes began to look not just at the world but into it, searching for meaning. The same curiosity that drives us to map the stars once drove those early wanderers to trace patterns in the dust, to follow the moon across the sky, to wonder what it all meant. It was a fragile beginning, one that could have easily vanished like smoke. But it didn't. Somewhere, in the long hush between storms and seasons, one spark caught. One lineage began not just to live, but to remember. And memory, once born, would never be silenced again. The unseen ancestors fade now into the mist, their bones becoming the soil from which a new consciousness will rise, one that will name, create, and dream. The age of instinct gives way to the first shadow of thought. Soon, the world will no longer be silent. Soon, firelight will speak. They live in our blood, whispering across millennia the forgotten humans we still carry. Their bones sleep beneath mountains and riverbeds, their faces long dissolved into earth, yet fragments of their essence drift quietly through our veins. Each heartbeat is a soft echo of another time, a world where we were not alone. Long before history began, the earth was home to many kinds of human. The Neanderthals roamed the cold valleys of Europe and Western Asia, clothed in furs, their eyes reflecting the flicker of firelight. The Denisovans thrived deep in the mountains of Siberia, their presence once invisible until a sliver of bone revealed their name. Far to the east, on islands shrouded in mist, the tiny Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of prehistory, carved tools from volcanic stone, living stories that would never be written. Others, the ghostly Homo luzonensis, the Red Deer cave people, the ancient Melanesians, drifted through time like forgotten chapters in a book we barely remember writing. Science calls them cousins, but perhaps the truth is softer, stranger. They were not failed experiments, not lesser versions of us. They were alternate possibilities, reflections of what humanity could have been. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived in parallel worlds, each shaped by their landscapes, each inventing their own answers to the same eternal question: how to survive, how to belong, how to understand the sky. The Neanderthals, once mocked as brutish cave dwellers, have begun to speak again, not in voice, but in the language of their bones. We now know they crafted tools with remarkable precision, used pigments to decorate their bodies, and buried their dead with care. In Spanish caves, red ochre handprints cling to the rock like memories that refuse to fade, made tens of thousands of years before our species ever arrived. These were not the marks of beasts, they were the signatures of minds. They knew loss, tenderness, and beauty. They stood at the edge of the same mystery we still face. What does it mean to be alive, and to know that one day you will not be? The Denisovans, once thought to be ghosts of DNA, have also stepped into faint light. We have never seen their faces, yet their legacy lingers in the highlands of Tibet and the islands of the Pacific. Within the genes of modern humans from those regions lies the silent gift of survival, a Denisovan adaptation that allows blood to hold oxygen at dizzying altitudes. Their genius was not written in words or art, but in endurance. In this way, they never died. Their knowledge lives in breath itself. And then there were the small ones, the Homo floresiensis, whose bones were found in a cave on the island of Flores. Barely a meter tall, with brains no larger than an orange, they hunted and crafted tools, navigating the jungle by torchlight. Scientists still puzzle over how they reached their island, surrounded by treacherous seas. Some whisper of ancient seafaring, others of land now swallowed by rising waves. To the islanders who once told legends of the Ibu Gogo, the small, hairy people who whispered in the dark, perhaps they never vanished at all, only retreated deeper into myth. Each of these beings, now extinct, once looked upon the same moon we do. Each held a spark of thought that burned briefly and was gone. And yet, in a quiet way, they endure. Genetic studies reveal that modern humans outside Africa still carry traces of these kin up to 2% Neanderthal and fragments of Denisovan code. It is as if their voices were woven into the chorus of our being, hidden in every cell. When you breathe, when you dream, when you shiver beneath the cold night sky, part of that ancient world stirs inside you. Perhaps this is why we feel nostalgia for places we've never seen, or for eras we cannot name. Deep beneath consciousness lies an ancestral memory, a whisper from those who walked before us. A sense of the hunt, the fire, the cold, the bond of tribe. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Somewhere in our marrow, we still carry the map of a vanished earth. Imagine them not as strangers, but as neighbors. Their children laughed, their elders mourned, their tribes shared stories by firelight. They touched the same questions we do love: death, belonging, the vast unknown. They too must have looked into the eyes of their young and felt the ache of continuity, the unspoken hope that life would go on. The difference between them and us is not as wide as the centuries would have us believe. Yet something shifted. The world began to cool. Forests turned to dust, prey grew scarce, and the fragile balance between species began to crumble. In this narrowing corridor of survival, one lineage, ours, began to spread. The others faded, not from inferiority, but from chance, from circumstance, from the quiet, merciless mathematics of existence. Perhaps they were too gentle, too specialized, or simply unlucky. But their vanishing was not total. Like ghosts merging with the living, they became part of us. Modern science speaks of hybridization encounters, where our ancestors met these others and shared not only land but life itself. In that mingling, boundaries blurred. Humanity, it seems, was never pure. It was always plural. The myth of a single, isolated species was never true. We are the outcome of millions of intimate crossings, of mingled fates and shared fires. We are not one story, but a woven one. When you trace your lineage back far enough, you find not a straight line, but a web thread stretching into darkness, connecting forgotten names and places. Every cell in your body carries ancient messages, written not in ink, but in lightless time. We speak as if we alone survived, but that survival was never solitary. We are a chorus of vanished lives, singing softly through our veins. Even now, when you stand under the stars, some part of you remembers the eyes that saw them first. The night speaks the same language it always has, and something inside you still understands. The instincts that made those ancient beings listen for predators in the dark now make us listen for meaning. The warmth that drew them to fire still pulls us towards screens, cities and stories, new hearths for an old hunger. And maybe, just maybe, the boundary between us and them is thinner than we think. When archaeologists find a bone, a tool, a handprint, it isn't just evidence, it's an echo. A message from those who never meant to be forgotten. They remind us that evolution isn't a ladder, but a river branching, merging, flowing into itself. Some streams vanish underground, but the water continues. So when we speak of humanity, we speak of a collective ghost, the sum of everything that ever dared to wander. Their strength, their tenderness, their silence, all of it moves within us. We are not alone in our origins. We are haunted, beautifully, by every life that made ours possible. The last of the Neanderthals watched their fires fade against the encroaching ice. The Denisovans vanished into the wind. The small ones of Flores left only their shadows behind, but none truly disappeared. They became the soil, the breath, the memory. They became us. And as the long cold descended, one lineage remained, not because it was stronger, but because it remembered differently. From the ashes of extinction, consciousness began to dream anew. Soon, the silence of the world would be broken by song, and the story of humanity, woven from the voices of the lost, would begin again. The first true light in the darkness was not the sun. It was fire, fragile, restless, alive. When our ancestors learned to summon it, the world changed forever. Flames licked at the edges of night, pushing back the blackness that had ruled since the beginning. But with that light came something new, reflection. For the first time, the darkness could be seen from the outside. Fear, once a constant companion, became something to study, to understand, and perhaps to master. Imagine them gathered around the first campfires, small tribes huddled close, eyes gleaming with the reflection of flame. The air trembled with smoke and murmured voices. Beyond the circle of light, unseen things moved. Predators, spirits, the cold itself. The flicker of fire created shapes on cave walls, turning shadows into stories. In those shapes, consciousness stirred. The people began to see not only what was, but what might be. The fire taught them to imagine, and imagination taught them to survive. Every spark was a miracle and a warning. The same element that cooked food and warmed the weak could also devour everything they loved. To keep fire alive was to hold both life and death in trembling hands. Around it, they learned caution to respect what could not be controlled. That quiet tension between awe and fear became the first teacher of the human mind. As flames danced, the world revealed patterns. The hunters began to notice that certain stars returned with the seasons, that the cries of birds predicted storms, that danger had rhythm. The mind began to connect the unseen with the seen. From that connection came story, a bridge between fear and understanding. Each tale told by firelight carried a purpose, to remember where the beast had attacked, which berries had poisoned, which valley carried whispers of death. The ones who could weave these memories into story became leaders, teachers, protectors. Their words preserved the tribe long after the fire went out. Fear became language. It carved symbols into sound and taught the tongue to warn. Don't go there. Wait for the moon. Beware the water that moves too fast. Such warnings saved lives, But slowly, they became more than survival notes. They became myth. The rustle of the forest became a spirit's breath. The lightning a god's anger. The unknown was given a face so it could be spoken to, bargained with, appeased. The mind, unable to silence its questions, invented answers, and in doing so, it built the foundation of belief. It wasn't strength or speed that made us human, it was the ability to imagine what might kill us. That imagination became a shield sharper than stone. The one who could foresee danger before it struck had power, not through muscle, but through mind. Fear taught anticipation. Anticipation became wisdom. In the glow of firelight, evolution took a turn inward from the body to the mind, from the hunt to the story. But fear had another gift. It awakened memory. A single night of terror could echo for generations. The tribe that forgot was the tribe that vanished. So they began to remember with purpose, to repeat, to retell, to ritualize. The elders passed down every hard-earned lesson through whispers beside the flame. And somewhere in those repetitions, awareness deepened. They began to ask not only how to survive, but why survival mattered. The fire also changed how they saw each other. Faces glowed in its light. Expressions became visible. Emotions recognizable. The soft flicker taught empathy. To see another's fear reflected in your own eyes was to recognize kinship. That recognition bound them tighter than blood. Community itself was born in that shared glow, an agreement that safety was not solitary. The circle of fire became the first classroom, the first temple, the first home. Outside that fragile circle, the dark remained vast and indifferent. Eyes glimmered beyond wolves, leopards, the silent eyes of night. But inside, the fire's dance became a reminder that chaos could be held, if only for a while. The flame was both protection and prophecy, a mirror of human nature, forever hungry, forever reaching upward. Even now, when we stare into a candle or a screen, we feel that same ancient pull. We remember what it means to be small and alive, surrounded by mystery. In time, fire and fear wove themselves into our biology. The human nervous system evolved around them, pupils widening at sudden movement, hearts quickening in darkness. The adrenaline that once saved us from beasts now flares when a door creaks open at night, or a phone glows with unexpected news. Our instincts never left the fire, they only changed shape. Yet there was always beauty within the terror. The more we feared, the more we wondered. Fear created the question, and the question became our greatest inheritance. What moves beyond the trees? What happens after death? Why does the sun return? In searching for safety, we discovered curiosity, the twin of survival. Fire didn't just warm our hands, it illuminated our thoughts. It burned pathways into imagination, giving birth to everything from prayer to poetry. Even as the night pressed close, they learned to find calm in the crackle of flame. The steady rhythm of burning wood became a heartbeat for the tribe, something constant in a world that shifted too quickly. Children fell asleep to the sound, comforted by its warmth and rhythm. Fire became not just survival, but serenity. It was the promise that light could live within darkness. Somewhere in those long nights, the first stories of creation were told. Perhaps a spark fell into the ashes, and someone whispered that fire was a gift from the gods. Or perhaps a hunter dreamed of lightning striking dry grass, and believed he had seen the world's first birth. In both, imagination transformed nature into meaning. The fire no longer simply burned, it spoke. And humanity, for the first time, began to listen. The night is quieter now, but the lesson remains. The same fire still burns in our cities, our machines, our thoughts. Fear still guides us, whispering when to run, when to pause, when to look closer. It is the shadow that shaped reason, the first artist, the first philosopher. Without it, there would be no curiosity, no reflection, no story. From that fragile circle of light, everything began: art, belief, caution, hope. Fire taught us that survival is not only a battle against the world, but against ignorance. It gave us the courage to imagine both danger and destiny. And from imagination came remembrance, the seed of knowledge itself. Soon, these stories by firelight will become memory, and memory will take on a life of its own. The spark of awareness has caught, now it begins to spread. When the first hand touched the cave wall, humanity declared war against forgetting. In that gesture, simple, trembling, almost childlike, a new kind of consciousness was born. A hand dipped in ochre pressed against the cold stone, leaving a print that said, "I was here." It was not just art, it was resistance, against time, against silence, against the vanishing that claims all things. Imagine the world in which that hand existed. Torchlight flickering against uneven rock, smoke curling through a narrow passageway, the echo of footsteps merging with the breath of earth. The walls shimmer with images, bison leaping across shadow, hunters with spears drawn mid-motion, spirals and dots whose meanings are lost to us. These caves were not galleries, they were sanctuaries. Every mark carved or painted here was an act of devotion, a conversation with the unseen. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived moment to moment. The hunt, the fire, the cold night. But something shifted when the mind began to see not only what was now, but what had been and what could be. Symbolic thought, the ability to make one thing stand for another, changed everything. A line became a river. A circle became the sun. A hand became a life. Suddenly, the world could be represented, mirrored, and remembered. The first artists were not trying to decorate. They were trying to understand, to bring the invisible closer, to make sense of what moved beyond the limits of sight. Some anthropologists suggest these images were hunting magic, that painting a beast gave one power over it. Others believe they were spiritual, a way to commune with ancestors or gods. But perhaps they were something even simpler, the earliest attempt to hold memory outside the mind, to make thought visible. That act to mark is one of defiance. Nature forgets. The wind erases, the river reshapes, the forest consumes, but a handprint endures. It survives long after the hand itself has turned to dust. In that persistence lies the seed of meaning, to create something that outlives the self. The first symbols were not just images, they were promises. Among the oldest known pigments is red ochre, a mineral ground into powder, mixed with animal fat or water. It was smeared on walls, bones, and skin. Its colour, the colour of blood, of life, held a power that words cannot name. Archaeologists have found ochre-stained shells in African caves, carefully perforated as if worn on strings. Perhaps they were jewellery, or perhaps they were talismans, reminders that even in death, colour could carry the pulse of existence. Elsewhere, small carvings of animals and figures appear: reindeer, lions, women with exaggerated forms, etched in ivory and stone. Each one tells a story beyond the hunt. The artist who shaped them was not copying what he saw, but revealing what he felt. The act itself, the slow scraping, the focus, the breath was a form of meditation, a conversation between human and matter, between the fleeting and the eternal. In these early creations, imagination evolved into a survival tool. The symbol allowed humans to plan, to teach, to warn. A simple pattern drawn in ash could mark a trail. A carved stick could signify ownership. The mind had discovered abstraction, the power to move ideas through space and time. And with that came an entirely new dimension of survival, the ability to leave messages for the unborn. But beyond survival, something else flickered in the dark wonder. The same impulse that made them shape tools made them shape beauty. They began to see the world as layered, filled with meanings that overlapped like shadows. A mountain was not just a mountain. It was the body of something vast. The sky was not only emptiness, it was the dwelling of mystery. Every mark on the wall was both imitation and invocation, a way to summon what could not be captured by sight alone. Perhaps that is why these images still move us, even across tens of millennia. When we stand in those caves today at Lascaux, at Altamira, at Chauvet, and gaze upon the red horses, the black bulls, the ghostly outlines of hands, we feel something immediate, electric. We recognize ourselves in them, not because we understand what they meant, but because we know the impulse behind them, the longing to be seen, to be remembered, to say, "I was part of this world." That longing is the same force that drives every story, every song, every word we speak. To create a symbol is to defy disappearance. Even now, in our glowing cities, we draw symbols on screens, letters, emojis, signs repeating that ancient ritual of meaning-making. Each one is a descendant of that first handprint. The technology has changed, the need has not. And yet, there is something haunting in these early works. The artists who made them could not have known we would one day find them. They painted not for an audience, but for presence itself. It was enough to place a mark where none had been before, to turn emptiness into memory. Theirs was art without vanity, without fame, without the noise of interpretation. It was pure conversation between the human and the eternal. Inside some caves, handprints appear side by side, overlapping generations, leaving their touch upon the same surface. The walls became living archives, layered with breath and time. Each print slightly different in size and shape, yet all speaking the same wordless truth. We were here. If the caves could speak, they would tell of laughter, of chants, of silence heavy with reverence. They would tell of the birth of meaning itself. There's a quiet poetry in knowing that the same species capable of fear and violence also invented beauty for no practical reason. In a world that demanded constant attention to survival, they paused to create. They spent hours grinding pigment, lighting fires, climbing walls. For what? For a glimpse of eternity. For the comfort of knowing that some part of their existence might remain when everything else was gone. And perhaps, in those moments of creation, they felt a presence watching not gods above, but future eyes like ours. The idea that someone, someday, might stand where they stood and feel the same heartbeat through stone. Art, then, became the first bridge through time, a silent dialogue across tens of thousands of years. Symbols gave humans power not just to remember, but to imagine together. A mark could mean the same thing to many minds. Shared meaning became shared identity. The tribe could now think as one plan, worship, dream. The walls of caves became the first classrooms, the first temples. In pigment and pattern, humans found a way to weave memory into matter. Every brush of ochre, every carved line, every hand pressed against stone was an announcement that the mind had stepped beyond the moment. It was a declaration that thought could endure beyond thought, that feeling could echo long after the heart had stopped. The first symbols were not born from chaos, but from love, the love of existence, fragile and brief, reaching desperately toward the infinite. And as the smoke drifted upward, curling into the blackness, those ancient artists must have sensed it that they had done something irreversible. They had given form to the invisible. They had created the first mirror of the human soul. From that moment on, we would never stop marking, shaping, naming. We would chase meaning through every age, carving it into everything we touch. The walls remain, the hands remain, the silence remains. But within that silence burns the oldest truth of all, that to create is to remember, and to remember is to live forever. Soon, these markings will begin to speak. Shapes will turn into signs, signs into sound. The first symbols will give birth to language, and through language, memory itself will awaken. Every word you speak is a fossil of an ancient spell, the first power that made us human. Long before ink and alphabet, before stories and scripture, there were sounds that shaped the air and changed reality. A cry, a whisper, a rhythm of breath language began not as intellect, but as instinct. It was born in the space between heartbeat and silence, when one being realized another could listen. Picture that moment. Two hunters in the half-light of dawn. One points toward the trees, the other follows his gaze. A sound escapes, the first short, sharp, filled with meaning. Danger. Prey. Warning. It's not yet a word, but it is more than noise. It carries intention, and in that instant, understanding leaps from one mind to another like a spark. That was the first spell the moment thought learned how to travel. From there, sound began to take shape. Over generations, grunts softened into syllables, rhythm replaced raw urgency, and breath became structured thought. Communication evolved from reaction to creation. Words became bridges, carrying knowledge across distance and time. A child could learn from a parent's voice without seeing the danger for themselves. A memory could be handed down as easily as fire. In this way, speech became humanity's first immortal thing, an invisible thread weaving the living to the dead. To speak was to remember. The hunter who described a storm taught others how to survive it. The mother who sang to her child passed down not just comfort, but rhythm, a pattern the child would one day repeat. The tribe that shared a language shared more than words. They shared reality itself. They began to see through the same lens, to name the same sky, to believe in the same invisible patterns. Language was not just sound, it was consensus. It shaped perception, gave order to chaos, and turned existence into something that could be understood. But there was something stranger within it, something almost sacred. To name a thing was to claim it, to pull it out of the void and make it real. The moment a mountain, a river, or a star received a name, it became part of the human story. The unnamed was chaos. The named was known. This quiet magic still lingers in us. Even now, when we whisper someone's name in the dark, we feel the weight of its power, the ability to summon presence out of absence. Every language that ever existed carried its own music, its own way of seeing. Some used tone to express emotion, others used rhythm to shape memory. Words were not only said, they were felt, sung, tasted. Early speech was inseparable from breath and movement. It was ritual, performance, heartbeat. To speak was to participate in creation. The ancient storytellers understood this instinctively. Their voices were instruments, their stories living spells meant to stir the soul. Perhaps that is why so many myths begin with a voice. In the beginning was the word, some traditions say. Others tell of songs that called worlds into being, or gods who spoke reality into form. These weren't coincidences. They were reflections of something deeply human, the recognition that speech itself creates. To utter is to shape, to imagine is to summon. Our ancestors may not have understood the brain's architecture, but they knew, somehow, that thought made sound, and sound made world. Language also carried another gift connection. It allowed empathy to grow beyond instinct. Words made it possible to share not just danger, but feeling. Sorrow, love, longing, awe. The first poems may have been mourning cries that turned grief into beauty. The first prayers may have been questions spoken into the dark, hoping anyone might hear. Through words, isolation began to dissolve. Humanity learned to be many, yet one. There is a quiet irony in this. The more we spoke, the more aware we became of silence. Language revealed the boundaries of thought, showing us where knowledge ended and mystery began. To name the world was to see how much of it remained unnamed. In that paradox, consciousness deepened. We began not only to describe, but to reflect, to think about thinking, to remember, remembering. Was it language that created consciousness, or consciousness that longed to speak? The answer may be lost, but the question still stirs in us. Every time we open our mouths to form a sound that means more than survival. The first storytellers were not poets in the modern sense. They were keepers of memory, translators of experience. Around the fire, their words transformed the day's chaos into meaning. They spoke of hunts and storms, of omens and dreams, weaving emotion and observation into a single thread. Their listeners leaned forward, not merely to be entertained, but to understand. The story was a map guiding behavior, warning of danger, binding the tribe through shared imagination. The spoken tale became an inheritance more valuable than any tool. Over time, language grew more complex, layered with metaphor, humor, and rhythm. The tongue learned to dance. Words began to echo across generations, their meanings shifting like the stars, yet always carrying traces of the first utterance. Even now, when we speak, ancient instincts pulse beneath our grammar. Every phrase, every syllable, is a continuation of that primal experiment sound made sacred through intent. Think of how words still shape the world today. They build nations, destroy reputations, soothe hearts, ignite wars. They command, console, define, divide. The same power that once warned of danger now moves economies and ideologies. We may have forgotten their origin, but not their force. Each sentence we speak ripples outward, touching minds we'll never meet, shaping realities we'll never see. Language, more than fire or stone, is our most enduring creation, the invisible architecture of civilization itself. And yet, beneath all its sophistication, the ancient magic remains. We still use words to charm and to curse, to bless and to heal. We speak to the air and hope something hears. We whisper to the dying, speak to the unborn, talk to ourselves in the quiet moments between sleep and waking. We are creatures haunted by language, forever seeking to bridge the space between inner and outer, thought and world, self and other. Some scientists say that language arose by accident, a gradual adaptation of the brain for communication. But perhaps it was inevitable. Perhaps the universe needed witnesses, and words were the price of awareness. To describe the world is to love it, and love, like language, is the most dangerous magic of all. Once spoken, it cannot be unsaid. So the next time you form a word, imagine it glowing an ancient ember carried forward through millions of years of mouths and minds. You are breathing the same spell your ancestors whispered under the stars, the same rhythm that turned sound into story. Every syllable is a bridge across extinction, proof that thought can outlive flesh. When our ancestors first spoke, they did more than communicate. They cast a light into the abyss and called it meaning. They gave the formless a name, and in doing so, gave themselves a soul. Soon, those words will take on shape and myth. The stories they tell will grow larger than life, and language will become the loom on which belief is woven. The first spell has been cast, and it will never be broken. Before DNA told our story, myth carried our memory. Long before alphabets, before ink and record, humanity remembered itself through tales. Luminous threads spun from fear, wonder, and survival. A story could outlive flesh, stretching across generations like a bridge of sound. When words were still magic, myths became their echo, an attempt to hold truth through beauty, to preserve memory and metaphor. The first storytellers were not entertainers. They were keepers of the invisible. Around fires and in dark caves, they spoke of things too vast to touch creation, death, flood, and fire. They wrapped knowledge in symbols because the mind could not yet hold it directly. A flood story might remember an ancient deluge. A tale of a serpent might conceal the memory of a drought or a predator long extinct. Myths were not fiction. They were archives, written in dream. Across continents, across oceans, these stories mirrored each other in ways too strange to be coincidence. The world's beginnings, they said, rose from water. Light was stolen from the heavens by tricksters, crows, foxes, or gods. Humanity was shaped from clay, or dust, or the bones of giants. Even separated by millennia and mountains, our ancestors told the same stories in different tongues. Perhaps they were remembering the same distant catastrophe, carried forward by whispers through time. Why do these patterns repeat? Why does nearly every culture speak of floods that erased worlds, fires that ended ages, towers that reached too high? Some call it coincidence, others archetype the human mind searching for order in chaos. But perhaps the answer lies deeper. Perhaps myth is how memory survived the extinction of its witnesses. When ice swallowed valleys and seas rose to consume islands, words were the only vessels that could float above oblivion. A story could move where flesh could not. It could travel beyond death, beyond empire, beyond language itself. Myths were the first data, compressed, encrypted, and stored in song. A flood becomes a moral about pride. A storm becomes the wrath of gods. Hidden inside each tale is a lesson. Remember what happened before, so it will not happen again. Through myth, experience became eternal. The first myths did more than preserve, they explained. Why thunder shakes the sky, why the moon follows the sun, why we are here. To live without answers was unbearable, so humanity created its own cosmology. The invisible became personal. Lightning became the weapon of a god. Rivers were living spirits. The sky itself was a face looking back. To speak of divinity was to speak of pattern, the sense that life was not random, but woven. Over time, these stories shaped morality. The trickster taught the danger of arrogance. The flood warned against forgetting. The hero's journey, descent, struggle, rebirth became not only entertainment but instruction. Myth was the original teacher. It gave shape to chaos and whispered, "There is meaning here, even in loss." Around the fire, a child learned not just the tale but the lesson hidden beneath its skin. Some of these myths, when stripped of their divine clothing, reveal something almost scientific. The flood of Gilgamesh may recall the melting of glaciers. The fire of Prometheus may echo the discovery of lightning and flame. The serpent in the tree may hint at the moment knowledge first divided innocence from awareness. Beneath the poetry lies history events, seen through the eyes of survival, carried forward as parable. And yet, Myths did not exist only to explain the world. They existed to comfort. They turned terror into story, and story into understanding. To tell of monsters was to shrink them. To name chaos was to contain it. The unknown became manageable once it had a face and a fate. Every myth was a mirror, showing humanity its fears and its potential. In the gods we invented, we saw ourselves magnified, fragile, angry, divine, doomed, eternal. Even now, in our age of machines and logic, myth has not left us. It only changes its costume. The old gods fade into the background, replaced by new icons. The stories of heroes, rebels, lovers, and saviors retold in modern form. We still crave the same rhythm of struggle and redemption. We still search for patterns where none should exist, as if the ancient mind within us refuses to forget its first language. Perhaps myths endure because they speak not only of the past but of the structure of being itself. They are the scaffolding of thought, the echo of ancestral dreams. In their repetition, they remind us that our minds are built to seek meaning, to find symmetry, even in chaos. A myth may not be fact, but it is truer than fact, because it reveals how humans feel truth, not how they measure it. When we listen to these old tales of floods and fires, of gods who fall and rise again, we are hearing the heartbeat of our species. Each story is a memory fossilized in language, shaped by countless voices. Before DNA told our story, myth carried our memory. And in a way, it still does. Genes shape our bodies, but stories shape our minds. Both are codes of survival. One is written in cells, the other in sound. If you could see myth the way you see a strand of DNA, you would find recurring sequences, patterns that loop and repeat, mutations that adapt to new environments. The same myth of rebirth appears in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in the Arctic. The same mother goddess nurtures the world in Greece, in India, in forgotten stone carvings beneath African soil. Each version is different, yet the design remains a story of destruction and renewal, of loss and return. Humanity dreams in genetic rhythm. Maybe this is why the oldest myths feel familiar. They are not foreign stories, but ancestral memories, buried deep in the mind. To dream of flood or fire is to awaken that ancient code, the knowledge that everything ends and everything begins again. The gods, the heroes, the monsters, they are the shapes our fears and hopes have always worn. They are reminders of what we have survived and what we might yet become. As long as we tell stories, myth lives. It breathes through every retelling, adapting, remembering, waiting. And though the world no longer gathers around a single fire, we still listen in the glow of new flames, screens, pages, voices in the dark. We are still the same species, longing to make sense of existence, to feel that the pattern continues. Soon, these myths will take form beyond words. They will become ritual, the movement of story into action, belief, and devotion. Humanity will not just tell the sacred, it will perform it. The spoken will become embodied, and myth will become faith. Before temples or priests, there were trembling hands offering bones to the darkness. Long before belief had names, faith began as a gesture, a small act of surrender to forces too vast to understand. Hunger, cold, and death ruled the world, and early humans learned quickly that survival required more than strength. It required reverence. The wind, the sun, the hunt, the storm, all were powers beyond control. And so the first rituals were born not from doctrine, but from desperation. Imagine the first burial. A shallow pit carved into frozen earth. The body of a hunter lies wrapped in animal hide, surrounded by tools, beads, and fragments of ochre. Someone kneels nearby, pressing a hand to the soil as though to comfort it. They do not yet have words for grief or hope, but they feel both. In that gesture, the offering of care to the dead, something profound occurs. Life acknowledges itself. Death becomes not just an ending, but a mystery to be spoken to. From that moment, ritual began to shape the rhythm of existence. Each sunrise became a promise, each meal an offering. When the hunt succeeded, bones were stacked neatly beside the fire. When it failed, the same bones were burned or buried to appease unseen watchers. Gratitude and fear were the twin engines of devotion. To thank was to invite fortune's return. To sacrifice was to prevent its wrath. In caves, archaeologists have found traces of ancient altars, stones darkened by soot, arranged carefully near bones of animals and sometimes humans. These were not random acts of superstition. They were early attempts to negotiate with reality itself. To leave a gift in the earth was to say, "We understand your power, please spare us." To sprinkle blood or ash upon the ground was to join the endless exchange between life and decay. Every act of worship was, at its heart, an act of communication with the unknown. Season followed season, and ritual grew into pattern. When spring returned, dances were held to ensure its coming again. When food was scarce, songs were sung to the spirits of the hunt. In each ritual the same plea echoed, "Let there be enough. Enough warmth, enough life, enough future." Hunger was the first prayer, and gratitude was the second. Together, they became the heartbeat of early spirituality. Even in these primal acts, there was beauty. Firelight flickering on painted walls, faces smeared with ash and ochre, voices rising into the night, carrying the first hymns raw, wordless, sincere. The rituals may have looked chaotic, but beneath them lay an order deeper than any written law, a recognition that life moves in cycles: birth, death, decay, renewal. The people danced not just to summon food or fortune, but to remind themselves that existence continued, even when they could not see how. At the center of this early faith stood the body, the fragile vessel that felt both hunger and hope. Fertility rituals celebrated the mystery of creation, the miracle of birth from flesh. Seeds pressed into soil mirrored children pressed into arms. Women, capable of giving life, were often revered as living altars. Clay figurines found buried in ancient fields, the so-called Venus idols, may not have been idols at all, but prayers in shape, symbols of abundance, whispered into earth to coax it into blooming. And always, behind these acts, lingered the awareness of death. The same soil that nourished the living also consumed them. Ritual became the bridge between the two, a way to soften the boundary. To bury a body with care was to believe that something lingered beyond. To place food beside the dead was to hope they still hungered somewhere. These gestures were not denial, but compassion extended across the veil. Death, once terrifying, became a conversation. Every offering, every chant, every rhythmic beat of hands on drumskin served one purpose: to make the invisible feel answerable. Humans were learning to reach upward and inward at once. To light a fire was to summon both warmth and meaning. To sacrifice was to acknowledge that life demands balance, that nothing can be taken without giving something in return. And in this exchange, community was born. Rituals united the tribe in shared vulnerability. When they danced for rain or buried their dead, they did it together. The fire's glow on their faces was not only illumination but reflection, each seeing themselves in the other's trembling devotion. Fear became bearable when shared. Gratitude became richer when spoken in chorus. In those moments, they were not alone against the vastness. They were part of something larger, something sacred. The gods they imagined were not distant rulers but mirrors of need, spirits of sky, river, beast and flame, each an embodiment of survival's fragile balance. When storms destroyed their shelters, they pleaded with the wind. When a hunt brought bounty, they thanked the animal's soul. This reciprocity, simple and sincere, formed the foundation of morality. Respect the forces that sustain you, and they may continue to do so. Over generations, rituals became stories, and stories became faith. The hunter's dance evolved into mythic reenactments of divine battles. The burial offerings became symbols of passage into other realms. But at their root, these acts still carried the pulse of that first hunger and that first hope. Every prayer, every sacrifice, every sacred gesture was still a conversation between fragility and eternity. If you could stand among them, if you could feel the cold air, hear the crackle of fire, smell the mingled scent of smoke and blood, you would recognize something deeply familiar. The same need still hums within us, to make meaning from the uncontrollable, to thank what we fear, to hope even when reason falters. We have given our gods new names, but their origins remain the same, born from the trembling of the human heart in the face of the unknown. The rituals of early humans were not naive. They were profound expressions of awareness, acknowledgements that life was both gift and burden. Each dance beneath the stars, each whispered plea to the earth, was a small defiance of chaos. They could not stop the storms, but they could meet them with rhythm and song. They could not halt death, but they could soften its touch with memory. Before temples or priests, there were trembling hands offering bones to the darkness, gestures of faith without instruction, worship without creed. In those hands, humanity discovered something essential: the power to transform fear into meaning, to turn survival into ceremony. Soon, these rituals will evolve, growing more elaborate, more symbolic, reaching beyond the earth toward destiny itself. The gods will multiply, the ceremonies will deepen, and what began as gratitude will become the architecture of belief. To bury the dead was to admit the existence of forever. Somewhere in the long dawn of our species, humanity crossed an invisible threshold the moment we refused to let the fallen simply disappear. The earth closed over a body, and in that act, life declared that it could not end in silence. Death became more than a final breath. It became a passage. Long before pyramids and tombs, long before scripture named the soul, there were graves carved into the cold earth, bodies wrapped with tenderness. Archaeologists have uncovered them, skeletons laid with tools, flowers, shells, and beads. Red ochre dusted on bones like a symbolic sunrise, as if painting the body with life's echo. These gestures were not practical, they were emotional. Someone had knelt beside the dead, arranging their hands, placing stones where eyes once looked outward. That care is evidence of something extraordinary, the awakening of empathy beyond the moment. It is easy to imagine the scene: a quiet evening, a body resting in the ground, the living gathered in a circle, unsure of what to do with the ache in their chests. They could not bring the person back, but they could keep them somewhere. The first burial was the first attempt at permanence, a belief that love, memory, or spirit might survive beneath the soil. In that stillness, death transformed from horror to mystery, something that demanded ritual, not escape. We do not know when humanity first imagined an afterlife, but we know the longing that created it. Perhaps it began with dreams, those nightly visitations where the dead returned to speak. The hunter who lost his brother might have seen him again in sleep, his image flickering between shadow and firelight. Upon waking, he would have wondered, if he can visit me in dream, then perhaps he has not gone. Perhaps another world runs parallel to this one, a hidden path where the dead still walk. From that dream grew faith. Death was no longer an end but a doorway. Beyond it lay a landscape shaped by hope and fear fields, where ancestors hunted without hunger, rivers where spirits rested in calm reflection. Every culture, from the earliest tribes to the empires of stone, imagined that crossing differently, but all agreed on one truth: death required preparation. The living became caretakers of passage. Graves became messages. Food placed beside the body was not mere superstition. It was compassion expressed through ritual. A bowl of berries, a carved tool, a strand of beads, each object was a promise. You will need this where you are going. The care invested in these burials suggests that early humans believed death was a journey, not an erasure. The dead were not lost, they had simply gone ahead. Over time, these gestures grew into sacred traditions. The cave became a shrine. The fire became an altar. The mound became a monument to continuity. The earliest tombs, like those at Sungir in Russia or Kafza in Israel, tell stories written in stone and ochre. Bodies were buried side by side, sometimes hand in hand. Children were buried with shells and pendants, symbols of protection or love. Death, once feared, had become something holy. To bury the dead was to declare that life had meaning, that existence was not a random flicker in the void. For the first time, humanity looked at mortality and saw not chaos, but pattern. The awareness of death birthed the concept of soul. The fear of oblivion became the soil in which philosophy grew. What comes after? Where do we go? Why must we leave it all? The questions that define us began at the graveside. Even in grief, there was beauty. The flicker of torchlight over ochre bones, the murmur of chants rising into the night. The people did not yet have words for heaven or eternity, but they had reverence. They knew instinctively that something sacred lingered when a body became still. That invisible presence, call it spirit, essence, breath, haunted the living with tenderness. They could not see it, yet they felt it in wind, in fire, in memory. The same instinct endures today. We still build places for the dead, still speak their names, still arrange flowers where they lie. The forms have changed from cairns to cathedrals, from earth graves to digital memorials, but the impulse is the same. We cannot bear to think that light simply ends. And so we carry it forward in symbols, in ceremony, in remembrance. Death gave shape to empathy. In mourning, early humans began to imagine what it was like to be another, to exist beyond the self. The awareness of mortality sharpened love, deepened community, and inspired art. Perhaps this is why so much early creativity, painting, carving, music, blooms around death. To remember is to resurrect, if only for a moment. The dead, in turn, began to guide the living. Ancestors became guardians. Spirits became teachers. The living sought their wisdom in dreams, in fire, in the whisper of wind through trees. Death, once feared, became an axis of continuity, the invisible thread connecting past and present. Through remembrance, humanity built identity. Through ritual, it built belonging. If fire had given us imagination, death gave us depth. It turned our gaze inward and upward at once. It made us philosophers long before we had philosophy. To see a grave was to see both an ending and a promise. And though time has worn away the faces, the meaning endures. Love does not yield to decay. The ancients might not have known the word eternity, but they lived as if they did. In every burial mound and painted cave, they whispered their defiance to time. Their rituals say what we still feel in our quietest hours, that the story cannot end here, that something must continue beyond the dark. To bury the dead was to admit the existence of forever. In that act, humanity transcended instinct and touched something divine. Death became not only a shadow but a mirror reflecting what was most human: compassion, curiosity, and hope. Soon, these rituals of remembrance will draw people closer. Mourning will become ceremony. Ceremony will become community. And out of that shared reverence for the unseen, the first civilizations will rise, built upon the promise that no life, once remembered, is ever truly gone. The first walls were not built for safety, but to keep the past from escaping. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity moved with the seasons, chasing herds, following rivers, guided by stars and hunger. The world itself was home, and permanence was a thing unknown. Yet somewhere around 12,000 years ago, as the last great ice began to retreat, something within the human spirit shifted. The wanderers stopped. The endless path began to circle, and for the first time, the fire did not die when morning came. The first village was not a city, it was a promise. In the valley of the Jordan River, a cluster of huts rose from the earth, near a spring that never failed. The place would one day be called Jericho, a name far younger than its spirit. Here, people built walls not of conquest, but of remembrance. The stones were laid not merely to protect, but to define. To say, this is where we belong. Picture it: mud brick houses packed close together like cells of a hive, their walls thick and cool against the heat. Smoke curls through small openings in the roof, carrying the scent of grain, of fire, of life made predictable. Outside, the wind moves over a new kind of landscape, one marked not by the prints of nomads but by furrows, seeds, and boundaries. The soil that once fed them now obeys them. They have learned to plant, to wait, to trust time itself. Settling changed everything. When you remain in one place long enough, you begin to dream differently. You begin to imagine tomorrow not as a threat, but as a shape you can build. The first villages were acts of faith, belief that the world would continue long enough to make planning worthwhile. The walls of Jericho rose not just from mud, but from conviction, that permanence could be invented, that the future could have foundations. With each stone placed, humanity entered into a quiet contract with the earth. They became caretakers, cultivators, stewards of the soil they once wandered. The hunter's fire, once brief and fading, became the hearth a flame meant to last, and around that hearth the rhythm of life changed. Day was for work, night for story. Time began to have meaning beyond survival. Childhood stretched into memory. Old age became something worth reaching. The shift was not peaceful. To settle meant to stay, and to stay meant to defend. Boundaries were born, and with them, the first sense of ownership of land, of harvest, of history. Yet even in their fragility, these new villages thrived. Çatalhöyük, in the plains of Anatolia, rose like a labyrinth of rooftops, thousands of people living without streets, moving from home to home across the very top of their world. Inside, the walls were alive with art murals of bulls, vultures, and human hands. Skulls were plastered and painted, not hidden but celebrated, a reminder that the dead still watched over the living. Life and death now shared the same address. In these early settlements, architecture itself became a language. The act of building was not only practical, it was spiritual. To raise walls was to challenge impermanence, to declare that memory would have a place to live. Each home was a monument to continuity, each foundation a quiet prayer that the world would not undo itself again. Archaeologists find in these places traces of ritual buried beneath daily life. Offerings hidden under floors, clay figurines tucked into corners, bones arranged beside doorways. These were not random acts. They were signs that humans understood home as something sacred, a bridge between earth and spirit. To dwell was to participate in creation. To sleep beneath a roof was to believe that the sky, too, could be held in place. The architecture of belonging changed the architecture of the mind. Once, memory had been oral, carried in stories and song. Now, it had walls. The village itself became a kind of body, with pathways like veins, hearths like hearts, and generations nested within, like cells renewing themselves. To be born within walls was to inherit more than land. It was to inherit the story of everyone who had lived before. Permanence became identity. And yet, beneath this comfort, something uneasy stirred. In building walls, humanity had also built the idea of separation between inside and outside, us and them, sacred and profane. The same stones that sheltered the fire also trapped it. Safety carried the seed of confinement. The wanderer's heart, once wild and open, now beat behind clay and brick. But perhaps that was the price of civilization, to trade freedom for memory, wilderness for belonging. In the narrow alleys of Çatalhöyük, where walls stood shoulder to shoulder, people learned cooperation as necessity. Every roof was someone else's floor, every resource a shared risk. The concept of we deepened. Where once tribes had followed instinct, now they followed custom, unwritten rules formed by proximity and repetition. The village became humanity's first teacher of empathy. Living so close demanded patience, compromise, and ritual to soothe the inevitable frictions. Each home had its own shrine, its own small altar, but over time those altars began to look alike. The clay figures grew more detailed, the paintings more deliberate. Belief was beginning to take form, shaped by familiarity. When the harvest succeeded, the villagers thanked something, not the random sky, but a presence they could imagine, a protector that lived among them. The seeds of faith had taken root in the soil of settlement. Even now, when archaeologists brush away the dust from those walls, they find something hauntingly intimate. The fingerprints of builders still press faintly into clay, the impressions of hands that shaped the very concept of home. You can almost feel their intentions, not conquest, not pride, but care. The wall was a cradle, a boundary not against danger but against loss. It kept the wind of oblivion from sweeping everything clean again. In the rhythm of daily life, the grinding of grain, the tending of fires, the laughter of children, time began to stretch forward in ways it never had before. The future was no longer an unknown storm. It was a room waiting to be filled. And with that idea came the first whispers of legacy. People began to ask not only how to live, but how to be remembered. Permanence became purpose. The first walls were not fortresses. They were containers for dreams, for families, for stories that needed to be held in place. In those early settlements, humanity performed its most radical act. It decided that chaos could be shaped, that eternity could be invited to stay. The ruins of Jericho and Çatalhöyük still stand, silent yet breathing. Their stones remember hands that refuse to drift away with the wind. Each fragment speaks the same truth, that to build is to believe. To stack one brick upon another is to say, we are still here, and we intend to remain. And so the fires that never went out became the heartbeat of civilization. From their glow, new questions arose. If a home can endure, can meaning? If we can build shelter for our bodies, can we build one for the soul? Soon, the walls would no longer be enough. Humanity would begin to imagine that something greater lived within them, presences unseen, protectors of hearth and harvest. The gods themselves would soon find their first homes. They carved time into stone to remind eternity that we once existed. Before writing, before empire, before gods had names, humanity began to build with a new kind of ambition, one that reached beyond the horizon of a single life. The first true monuments were not meant to house the living but to speak to the unseen. In the stillness of plains and the silence of hills, great stones were raised toward the sky, aligned with the sun, the moon, and the turning of the seasons. These were not homes. They were conversations with time itself. Long before the pyramids or ziggurats, in a forgotten age at the end of the ice, people gathered in the highlands of Anatolia to shape a mystery from stone. Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years old, stands as the oldest known temple in the world, built by hands that had only just learned to settle. Massive T-shaped pillars, carved with foxes, cranes, snakes, and abstract signs, stand in circular enclosures half buried in earth. No one knows why they were raised, or why their builders later buried them again, as if to hide them from time. But in their silence, a message endures. Something within humanity had awakened the need to mark the infinite. Imagine the effort. Hundreds of tons of limestone moved without beasts of burden or metal tools. Each pillar shaped and lifted through sheer cooperation, ritual, and purpose. What compelled them? Survival alone cannot explain it. Hunger and shelter no longer satisfied the heart. Now there was a deeper hunger to make meaning tangible. The people of Göbekli Tepe built not for safety or shelter, but for remembrance. In those stones, they trapped an idea that words could not yet express, that existence itself could be carved into permanence. Every pillar stands in careful alignment with celestial events, the solstice, the equinox, the path of certain stars. These were not random arrangements. The builders knew the heavens intimately. They watched the sky as others might watch a god's face. By placing stone where stars once rose, they created a bridge between earth and eternity. In doing so, they built the first architecture of consciousness, monuments that taught the mind to look upward and inward at the same time. Thousands of years later, the pattern continued. Across Europe, across seas and continents, new stones were lifted into the same dialogue with the sky. At Karnak in France, long lines of megaliths stretch across the landscape like frozen waves of intention. In Malta, temples curve in shapes that echo the human body, womb-like chambers carved into the living rock. And in Britain, Stonehenge rose a ring of pillars that captured both light and shadow, life and death, in perfect symmetry. Each culture, separated by oceans and millennia, reached for the same mystery: how to make time visible. To stand among these stones is to feel small, yet strangely remembered. Their weight presses against the centuries, like the slow pulse of the planet. The carvings on their surfaces, spirals, circles, serpents, seem less like decoration and more like encryption. Some archaeologists call them calendars, others call them temples. But perhaps they were both instruments for measuring the rhythm of the cosmos, and mirrors reflecting the rhythm of the soul. They carved not only for the gods above, but for the generations below. The monuments speak to the future, to us, across unimaginable distances of time. They say, "We were here. We felt wonder. We looked at the sky and understood that it was part of us." The builders may not have known our names, but they knew someone would come, someone who would listen. The stones were their language, their scripture, their offering to eternity. At Stonehenge, when the midsummer sun rises, it shines precisely through the heart of the monument, striking the altar stone in a blaze of light. On midwinter's day, it sets in the opposite direction, between two great uprights the dying of the year made visible. These alignments were not coincidence, they were choreography. Through stone and sunlight, humanity had learned to synchronize its breath with the cosmos. Time itself became sacred rhythm, a heartbeat shared between the earth and the sky. In these monuments, we see the birth of abstraction, the transformation of the physical into the symbolic. Stone replaced flesh as the vessel of remembrance. What could not be held in the hand was now held in structure. What could not be spoken was carved into geometry. The builders may have believed that to inscribe something in stone was to trap the essence of the divine that eternity could be persuaded to pause. The act of building was both devotion and defiance. To raise a monument was to stand against decay. Every hammer strike said, "We refuse to vanish." These structures were prayers rendered in physics, weight, balance, and endurance. Even when their purpose faded, their presence remained. Long after the languages that named them were forgotten, the stones continued to speak in silence. There is a haunting continuity between those early monuments and our modern world. We, too, build towers and temples, monuments of glass and steel. We still align them to meaning, to wealth, to power, to memory. We tell ourselves that we have advanced, yet the impulse is the same, to leave something that endures when breath has ended. We are still building Göbekli Tepe, still reaching for Stonehenge, still trying to convince eternity to notice us. Perhaps that is why these ancient sites stir something wordless in us. They remind us that the desire to be remembered is older than civilization, older even than history. Beneath our modern complexity lies the same instinct to anchor ourselves in a world that forgets. These stones are not ruins. They are proof that meaning can survive extinction. When you touch them cold, rough, unyielding, you touch the oldest dream of permanence. Each groove and mark carries the echo of a hand, a heartbeat, a vision. The builders are gone, their gods are gone, their reasons lost to dust. Yet their message remains clear. We once stood beneath the same sky, and we too reached upward. They carved time into stone to remind eternity that we once existed. And in doing so, they taught us how to endure. Soon, humanity's gaze will turn inward. Having built monuments to the heavens, we will begin to wonder about the inner cosmos, the mind itself, the unseen universe within. From sacred stones, consciousness will rise to ask a new question. Not where the gods dwell, but where we truly begin. The moment we saw ourselves, the age of innocence ended. For millions of years, life unfolded without reflection. Creatures lived and died, reacting, surviving, repeating the patterns carved into their blood. There was hunger and rest, fear and mating, but no mirror of awareness to fracture the simplicity. Then, somewhere in the slow unfolding of human evolution, a new kind of seeing appeared, not of the world, but of the self within it. It was the birth of consciousness, and with it came a quiet, shattering. No one can say when it happened. Perhaps it began by a river, when an early human leaned to drink and, for the first time, paused. The reflection in the water blinked back, eyes meeting eyes. The creature realized it was being watched, not by another, but by itself. Something ancient stirred a flicker of recognition that it was separate. The world was no longer a continuous flow of instinct. There was now an observer, and the observed, a boundary drawn in thought. From that boundary, everything changed. Awareness became a burden as much as a gift. The same mind that could imagine the hunt could now imagine its own end. The same memory that preserved danger also preserved sorrow. In the mirror of awareness, the human animal saw not just the present, but the inevitable. Death was no longer an event. It was a prophecy written in every breath. And so began the long ache of self-consciousness, the haunting knowledge that to exist is also to vanish. Art became the first therapy for this awakening. On cave walls, in carvings, in the rhythmic beat of drums, early humans externalized what they could not yet explain. They painted their hands on stone not only to say I was here, but also to ask, who am I? The outline of the hand was a declaration of individuality, proof that one could stand apart from nature and still belong to it. Every drawing, every carved figure, was a mirror crafted from memory. Through art, humanity began to translate emotion into form, reflection into permanence. But with awareness came unease. The once boundless world now pressed close with meaning. The hunter no longer saw only prey. He saw the fragility of life in every movement. The mother holding her child felt not just love, but the terror of impermanence. Even joy carried the shadow of loss. This was the cost of self-awareness, to feel everything twice, once in the living and again in the knowing. Somewhere in that tension, imagination deepened. To be aware of death is to imagine beyond it. The mind, desperate to reconcile the contradiction of existence, began to invent symbols of rebirth, of continuity, of the unseen. Self-awareness did not merely separate humans from nature, it made them architects of meaning. They began to ask questions the universe did not answer. What am I? Why am I here? What happens when the light goes out? The silence that followed those questions became the space where philosophy was born. In the earliest mirrors, pools of still water, polished obsidian, fragments of metal humans must have seen something both familiar and alien. The reflection was truth and illusion at once. A living ghost that mimicked every gesture yet had no substance. To recognize oneself in it was to experience both wonder and fear. That reflection was proof of existence, and a reminder of fragility. In that shimmering double, We saw both life and its end, bound together by awareness. Even language bears the echo of that awakening. Words like I and me are recent inventions compared to the long silence of evolution. They are linguistic mirrors, ways to define the separation between the observer and the world. To say I am is to draw a line in reality, to step outside the flow of being and look inward. But that power is double-edged. The more clearly we name ourselves, the more clearly we see what we are not and what we cannot escape. The invention of the self also brought empathy. To recognize one's own mind is to imagine that others possess one too. The boundaries that defined individuality also became bridges of connection. Pain, joy, love. These were no longer private instincts but shared experiences. We began to see others as mirrors of ourselves, their suffering reflected in our own awareness. The same consciousness that made us lonely also made us capable of compassion. In understanding that we would die, we learned to cherish the living. But the awareness of self also brought the illusion of control. Humans began to act not only to survive, but to define themselves. They sought identity in symbols, in belongings, in stories. They built masks literal and metaphorical to represent the faces they wished the world to remember. The concept of I expanded into we, and from we emerged culture, tradition, and memory. The self became both individual and collective, a mosaic of awareness spanning generations. And yet, beneath all this creation, the same haunting question remained. Where does the self end? Does it vanish with the body, or does it linger in some unseen realm? Every culture answered differently through myth, ritual, and prayer. But the question itself never changed. Consciousness had turned the universe into a mirror, and in its reflection, we saw both the divine and the doomed. Perhaps this is what makes humanity unique. Not that we think, but that we know we think. We live in a hall of mirrors, reflections within reflections, endlessly seeking the origin of the gaze. In every story we tell, every monument we raise, every name we speak, we are trying to reconcile that first shocking moment by the river. The moment we saw ourselves and could never return to innocence. Self-awareness made us creators, but also mourners. We build because we know all things fall. We love because we know all things fade. In this contradiction lies the essence of being human, to find beauty inside impermanence, to seek meaning inside the fleeting. The same awareness that burdens us with mortality also blesses us with wonder. It allows us to see the world not only as it is, but as it could be. The first mirror still waits in us. Every time we catch our reflection in glass, in shadow, in another's eyes, we meet that ancient moment again. We see the question that shaped our species. What am I? And though we still do not have the answer, the asking itself has kept us alive. Soon, awareness will turn toward its next frontier time. For once we saw ourselves, we began to see the hours passing, the seasons shifting, the future shrinking. With self-awareness comes time and time, the oldest of all prisons. When we learned to measure time, we also learned how to fear it. There was once a world without hours, where existence unfolded in rhythm with the wind, the sun, and the turning of seasons. Life flowed like a river with no beginning and no end, only the eternal now. But once consciousness awoke, humanity began to notice the slow decay of light, the shifting of shadows, the graying of hair. The same awareness that gave us imagination also revealed the truth that everything moves toward ending. The first clocks were not made of gears or stone, but of stars. Ancient people watched the sky as if it were a great pendulum, each sunrise a heartbeat, each moon a pulse. The heavens taught them the repetition of days, the inevitability of change. From the path of constellations, the concept of time descended invisible yet absolute. To name a moment was to kill its infinity. What was once the continuous flow of being became a series of points, measured, divided, lost. Calendars came next, the sacred attempt to trap eternity on clay and bone. Marks were carved for each day, each season, each migration of the sun. To count was to remember, but also to surrender. In capturing time, we became its captives. The harvest that once came when it willed, now had a date. The festival that once arrived with instinct now arrived with calculation. The pulse of nature became a schedule, and the human soul, once untethered, began to march to an invisible drum. Yet there was comfort in the counting. The calendar gave order to chaos, predictability to fear. It allowed us to plan, to store, to build. Civilization itself was born from this awareness. The temple and the clock tower share the same foundation, the need to understand what passes and what endures. By learning time, we learned power. But power, in its purest form, always whispers its own undoing. The paradox is this: the very awareness that made us creators also made us mourners. To know the future exists is to know that we will one day be absent from it. Time revealed progress, but it also revealed loss. Every dawn became a countdown. Every heartbeat, a reminder that the hourglass never reverses. The child became elder, the seed became dust, and the mind, trapped in the miracle of awareness, could not stop watching itself fade. Rituals arose to soften the weight of this knowledge. Birthdays, solstices, anniversaries, all attempts to make peace with the passing of hours. To celebrate time was to pretend, if only briefly, that we controlled it. We burned candles not to mark age, but to push back against the darkness gathering behind it. The first sundials cast more than shadows. They cast the illusion that by knowing when light will fade, we can bear its fading. But time does not stop for gratitude or grief. It devours gods as easily as empires. Even the monuments that once defied it, stone circles, temples, towers, crumble under its gaze. To be aware of time is to live under its rule, to feel it breathing behind every moment of joy. The ancients feared it as they feared death, because in truth, they are the same. Time is death stretched thin, the slow unmaking of what once was whole. And yet, it was this very fear that drove us forward. The dread of impermanence made us plant seeds, write words, build monuments. Every act of creation was rebellion against time's tyranny. The artist paints so that colour might outlast flesh. The lover whispers so that memory might outlast silence. The scientist measures the stars, hoping to chart a path beyond decay. All of civilization can be read as a single sentence written against oblivion. We were here. Still, beneath the achievements, the unease remains. We measure our lives with increasing precision, seconds, nanoseconds, atomic ticks, but precision does not bring peace. The more finely we divide time, the more acutely we feel it slipping away. Clocks were meant to organize us. Instead, they haunt us. The ticking has become a prayer we cannot stop reciting. There is tragedy in the human obsession with tomorrow. Animals sleep when tired, eat when hungry, live when alive. We, however, live in two directions at once, haunted by yesterday, anxious for tomorrow. Our minds, stretched thin between memory and anticipation, rarely rest in the present moment. The price of progress is perpetual motion. The cost of awareness is longing for stillness. And yet, even in this restlessness, there is beauty. To feel time passing is to know the value of a single heartbeat. To ache for more is to love what is fleeting. Perhaps that is the secret the ancients understood when they built their calendars aligned to stars. Not that they could stop time, but that by honoring it, they could make its passage sacred. Time is cruel, but it is also the canvas upon which meaning is painted. Without its flow, there would be no story to tell. When we learned to measure time, we also learned how to fear it, but that fear has given birth to everything we cherish. Without it, we would not build, love, remember, or dream. The same awareness that breaks our hearts also gives them purpose. Every sunrise we count, every sunset we mourn, every wrinkle and ring and shadow is proof that we exist within the grand current of becoming. The clock will always move forward, the sands will always fall, but within that unstoppable rhythm lies something miraculous, the ability to notice, to see the world change and still call it beautiful. Perhaps awareness was not a curse, but a calling to bear witness to impermanence and, in doing so, give it meaning. Soon, the mind will rebel against time's grip. It will search for escape not in clocks or calendars, but in knowledge, in the dream of eternity through understanding. Having built temples to measure the hours, humanity will now begin to build temples of thought, hoping that wisdom itself might outlast the ticking of the world. Before we studied nature, we were her apprentices. Long before the word science existed, before scrolls and theories and names for the stars, humanity learned by watching. The earth was the first classroom, and survival was the first lesson. Every sound in the forest, every change in the wind, every colour in the sky, spoke in a language older than speech. Our ancestors listened not with instruments or equations, but with their lives. The earliest discoveries were not flashes of genius, but slow awakenings. A hunter noticed that a certain leaf soothed a wound. A woman grinding roots realized some dulled pain while others brought sleep. These were not accidents, they were observations accumulated through generations of watching, touching, and trusting the natural world. Knowledge was born in quiet attention. The forest taught the healer, the mountain taught the builder, and the fire taught the dreamer. Fire, that restless teacher, revealed both danger and control. When lightning struck dry grass and turned night to terror, humanity learned two lessons: fear and curiosity. Those who fled survived, but those who lingered learned. Someone, someday, reached into the ashes after the storm and found warmth still breathing there. That was the beginning of understanding. To tame fire was to decipher one of nature's most powerful secrets: that destruction and creation are often the same force, seen from different sides. Each discovery built upon another, not through sudden revelation, but through repetition, trial, failure, memory. The first tools were not inventions, but imitations. Humans copied the precision of claws, the strength of teeth, the persistence of rivers that carved stone. The first hammers were born from watching rocks split under pressure, the first blades from noticing how a flint edge could cut through hide. Necessity made humans observant, and observation made them inventive. The stone became the first textbook. By striking it, shaping it, testing it, early humans learned the principles of cause and effect long before they had words for such things. A spark from two stones became the lesson that friction breeds energy. The hollow bone that whistled when blown became the first experiment in sound and breath. Nature provided the raw material. The human mind provided the pattern. Every innovation was an act of listening, a conversation between curiosity and environment. In this way, intelligence did not descend upon humanity like a gift. It grew like a vine, winding around necessity, reaching towards survival. We became thoughtful because the world demanded it. Hunger required foresight, injury required remedy, weather required prediction. The same forces that threatened to destroy us taught us how to endure. To live was to study, to fail was to learn, and to remember was to evolve. Even now, traces of that apprenticeship remain in our instincts. The smell of rain still stirs alertness. The sound of crackling fire still soothes. Our bodies recall lessons older than memory lessons taught by landscapes that shaped our ancestors' minds. The rhythm of the ocean became the rhythm of our blood. The patience of mountains became the patience of thought. Imagine the ancient hunter crouching beside a stream. He watches fish flash beneath the surface, watches how the water bends around stones, how the current changes when he moves his hand. In that moment, the principle of resistance, of flow, of balance, is learned without a single word. Such understanding is not separate from reverence. To know nature was to respect her. The more they understood her rhythms, the more they feared to break them. Science, in its first form, was an act of devotion. The healers, the watchers of stars, the keepers of fire, all were students of the same teacher. They learned that every effect had a cause, every plant a purpose, every season a meaning. They marked the phases of the moon, the migrations of birds, the bloom and decay of flowers. From these patterns grew calendars, medicine, agriculture, the first systems of thought. Nature's constancy taught them that knowledge could be repeated, tested, passed down. The invisible became visible through pattern. But nature also taught humility. For every mystery solved, a greater one appeared. The same sky that revealed the constellations also hid its depths. The same sea that fed them also swallowed without mercy. Humans learned that mastery was an illusion, that wisdom was not dominance, but harmony. The most successful tribes were those who learned to live within the limits of their world, not against them. The earth rewarded patience and punished arrogance. In this balance, the first philosophy was born. Even the simple act of planting a seed was a dialogue with mystery. To bury life in darkness and trust it to rise, this was faith long before religion. Each sprout was proof that nature could be persuaded, that order could emerge from the unknown. Farmers became astronomers by necessity, reading the heavens to know when to sow and when to reap. The line between spirituality and observation blurred. To study the stars was to listen to the gods. Over time, the lessons accumulated like layers of sediment. The first potter learned from the clay that dried in the sun. The first sailor learned from the wind that could not be seen, but could be felt. Even silence became a teacher, the stillness before storms, the quiet before migration. Everything spoke, if one listened long enough. The oldest scientists did not wear robes or titles. They wore the dust of the earth, the ash of the fire, the salt of the sea. Their experiments were written in muscle and memory. They learned the laws of nature not from books, but from consequence. A misstep meant poison, flood, starvation. The lessons were hard, but the understanding they left behind became the roots of everything that followed the medicine, the compass, the story. And though we call it progress now, the truth is that we have never stopped learning the same lesson. We are still nature's apprentices. The machines we build imitate her precision. The algorithms we design mimic her patterns. Our deepest wisdom remains borrowed. We did not invent logic, we inherited it from the forest that taught us balance, from the fire that taught us transformation, from the sky that taught us endlessness. There is a quiet beauty in realizing that all our mastery began with humility. Every cure, every tool, every revelation traces back to the same act. A human kneeling to observe something smaller, older, and wiser. The world was generous to those who listened, and merciless to those who did not. To survive was to pay attention, to thrive was to remember. Before we studied nature, we were her apprentices, and in truth, we still are. Though we build towers that touch clouds and devices that measure atoms, we remain bound by the same ancient agreement, to learn, to adapt, to marvel. The earth continues to speak, though now her language is harder to hear beneath our noise. But somewhere inside us, the old rhythm persists. The pulse that once quickened at thunder, the awe that once rose at sunrise, they still live in our blood. We are the students who never graduated, the observers who never stopped watching. And as long as curiosity burns, the lessons of the world will continue to unfold, one discovery at a time. Soon, that curiosity will grow restless. The mind, once content to listen, will begin to shape. Knowledge, once sacred, will become power, and the balance between learning and control will begin to tilt. Some truths weren't lost by accident, they were buried for our own protection. Throughout history, knowledge has flickered like firelight, sometimes nurtured, sometimes smothered. Every great discovery carries two shadows, the wonder of revelation and the weight of consequence. There are moments when humanity seems to leap forward suddenly, as if remembering something long forgotten. These leaps have always left traces, strange artifacts, inexplicable ruins, and fragments of understanding too advanced for their time. Archaeologists find clues that seem to whisper of forgotten mastery, ancient metal alloys that resist corrosion, crafted centuries before the chemistry to explain them. Glass made pure and clear in cultures without known furnaces capable of such heat. Megaliths shaped with precision that defies the crude tools we imagine our ancestors wielding. We call these anomalies mysteries, but perhaps they are memories, glimpses of experiments abandoned, technologies misplaced by time or by choice. The story of human progress is rarely a straight line. Civilizations rise, accumulate wisdom, and then vanish, often taking their secrets with them. Floods, wars, volcanic winters, and silence. Yet what if some knowledge did not vanish, but was hidden? The idea is not conspiracy, but caution. Our ancestors understood that certain truths could be as dangerous as they were divine. The alchemist's fire could heal or destroy, and not all fires were meant to burn unchecked. At the dawn of metallurgy, for instance, there was something almost sacred in the act of transforming stone to metal. To melt ore was to imitate the power of the sun, to command what once belonged only to the earth's core. In ancient furnaces, humans became creators, turning dull rock into shining blade, lifeless matter into instrument and weapon. The forge was the first laboratory and the first altar. Each smelter was both craftsman and priest, wielding fire that could sustain or annihilate. Some early cultures treated the smith as both revered and feared a being who walked too close to the secrets of creation. In other places, the knowledge of alloys and casting seemed to appear abruptly, as though borrowed. Bronze emerged almost simultaneously in distant lands, followed by iron, followed by steel. Each leap arrived before its full explanation, as if rediscovered rather than invented. Even now, archaeologists puzzle over how certain techniques arose, spread, and then disappeared again. What kind of world must it have been? where such mastery was gained and then deliberately forgotten. The same pattern haunts the remnants of architecture. Across continents, separated by oceans and epochs, stone monuments share uncanny geometry. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons fitted so precisely that a blade cannot slip between them. Corridors aligned perfectly with solstices. The same spirals, suns, and serpents carved from the Andes to Anatolia. It is tempting to believe in coincidence, yet coincidence repeated becomes language. Were these civilizations studying the same sky, or remembering the same lesson? Perhaps these were not isolated bursts of genius, but echoes of an older knowledge, one that once flowed freely through a connected human story. And perhaps, when the world burned or froze, those who survived chose silence over repetition. History remembers the victors, but wisdom often survives in fragments, disguised as myth, hidden in symbol, preserved only in intuition. Consider the myths of forbidden knowledge. Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods, the serpent offering awareness, the flood that punished a world grown too wise. These stories echo one truth, that knowledge carries consequence. The ancients may have understood this better than we do. They knew that curiosity is both sacred and perilous, that to awaken certain powers before understanding their cost is to invite ruin. The question is not whether such knowledge existed, but whether we were meant to remember it too soon. In fragments of ancient text, Sumerian tablets, Vedic hymns, forgotten hieroglyphs, there are descriptions of machines, lights, and sounds that seem impossible for their age. We cannot know if these were metaphors or memories, poetry or record. What matters is what they reveal about the human spirit, a constant yearning to recreate the divine, to reverse engineer the cosmos itself. Even in prehistory, humanity was already experimenting with godhood. Sometimes, progress demands amnesia. When a civilization destroys itself, it leaves behind ruins that warn more clearly than any book. Perhaps the lessons of Atlantis, of Babel, of every fallen empire, are not about punishment but protection. Knowledge, untempered by wisdom, becomes a weapon, and weapons have a way of turning upon their creators. The ancients may have understood this intuitively. Some truths must sleep until we are ready to hold them without burning. But forgotten knowledge never disappears completely. It seeps through generations like groundwater, resurfacing in dreams, myths, and rediscoveries. The spark of forgotten metallurgy lives in our modern chemistry. The lost harmonics of ancient architecture reappear in our equations of resonance and vibration. We rediscover what was lost, not through memory, but through pattern. The same dance of curiosity that has always guided us. Humanity is a species of remembering. And yet, there is an unease in this cycle. Why do we keep finding things we cannot explain, batteries in ruins, maps older than our known civilizations, carvings of stars unseen by ancient eyes? Are these remnants of forgotten epochs, or reminders planted by time itself to provoke humility? Every mystery uncovered seems to whisper the same thing: you have been here before. The forbidden discoveries are not merely artifacts, they are mirrors. They reflect our hunger to know and our fear of what knowledge demands. Each riddle reminds us that progress has a shadow, that understanding carries a price. To uncover is to change, and change is never reversible. There is a kind of mercy in forgetting. Not all knowledge lost is tragedy, some is reprieve. The world, after all, renews itself through erasure. Forests regrow, stars collapse, species evolve anew. Why should the mind of humanity be any different? Perhaps forgetting is nature's way of editing her own story, of ensuring that wisdom matures before it repeats itself. Still, the questions linger. Were there civilizations before history, cycles of learning and loss that preceded us? Are the ruins beneath the oceans, the bones of worlds that once knew too much? The evidence is elusive, but the possibility endures, and maybe that is enough. The purpose of mystery is not always to be solved, but to remind us that certainty is an illusion. Some truths weren't lost by accident. They were buried for our own protection. Beneath the soil of history, in myths that read like warnings, the past waits patiently. It knows that humanity will dig again. It knows that curiosity cannot be silenced, only delayed. And when we uncover those forgotten fires once more, we will face the same test our ancestors did. Will we use what we find to build or to burn? Soon, the world itself will answer. Power, once found, always changes those who hold it, and humanity is about to discover just how much it can change the world. The same hands that painted caves also built blades. For most of our history, creation and destruction were not opposites, but twins born from the same flicker of thought. The spark that learned to make fire also learned to burn. The mind that shaped stone into art learned how to sharpen it for war. Every invention that promised safety soon discovered its shadow. Humanity's genius was never only about survival. It was also about power, the ability to shape the world, and in doing so, to unmake it. When the first tools appeared, they were miracles. A chipped flint could cut hide, carve wood, build shelter. But in that same gesture, the discovery of control lay the seed of violence. A sharper edge could protect, but it could also kill. Somewhere along the way, necessity turned to choice. What began as an instrument of survival became an extension of will. The hand that built could now decide who deserved to live within those walls and who did not. Fire, once the guardian of warmth and story, became a weapon too. Flames that once marked safety began to devour villages. The power to preserve became the power to destroy. We like to imagine progress as light pushing back darkness, but in truth, every light casts a longer shadow. With each discovery came a new kind of danger, the danger of forgetting where the boundary lies. War, in its earliest form, was not born of hatred but of scarcity. When the fields failed or the herds vanished, one tribe turned toward another. Stone struck bone, blood mixed with dust. But soon, something else entered the pattern: pride. Conflict became ritual. Victory became a story to tell. The same imagination that had once carved beauty into walls now carved glory into memory. For the first time, death was not just an end, it was an idea. Weapons evolved as quickly as art. Spears balanced like brushstrokes, arrows carved with precision, metal shaped to mirror the curve of the human hand. Each new age of invention brought its own new ways of ending life. Bronze sang against bronze. Iron replaced it with silence. What had begun as cleverness became obsession, the relentless pursuit of improvement, even in killing. The genius that made us creators also made us perfect the means of destruction. Yet beneath the violence, something deeply human persisted: awe. Even as flames consumed what we built, we could not look away. We were terrified of our own brilliance. The campfires of creation and the pyres of war burned with the same hypnotic beauty. It is the oldest paradox of our species, that we are drawn to what can destroy us, as if destruction itself were proof of power. Civilization, for all its art and architecture, was built upon this uneasy balance. Every wall raised to protect became a target to conquer. Every discovery demanded defense. The plough and the sword were born from the same metal, their difference only in intention. Even language, our proudest invention, learned to lie, to manipulate, to command. Progress was never pure. It was a spiral, ascending and collapsing in turns. But with destruction came reflection. For the first time, the human heart began to question itself. The killer and the artist were no longer separate. They lived in the same soul. After the smoke cleared, someone always stood looking at what had been lost, asking why. That question marked the dawn of morality, the moment conscience began to speak louder than instinct. The same awareness that allowed us to kill also allowed us to regret. Perhaps this is how empathy was born from the aftermath of ruin. In the ruins of the hunt, the battle, the burned village, someone reached out to another and understood the pain mirrored there. Violence, paradoxically, revealed the fragility of life, and fragility revealed the need for mercy. From conflict, compassion emerged as a kind of rebellion, a refusal to let the darkness be final. Still, the pattern endured. Humanity's brilliance kept looping between creation and collapse. We mastered metallurgy, then melted swords into coins, then into cannons. We built cities that touched the clouds, then turned them to rubble. Even in peace, the tools of war waited patient, polished, inevitable. It was as if we feared to live without the possibility of destruction, as if survival itself had become too simple, too quiet. The same mind that built symphonies also engineered slaughter. The same curiosity that mapped the stars built machines of annihilation. Yet, hidden within that contradiction lies something profound. The understanding that creation and destruction are not enemies, but parts of the same divine impulse to transform. A seed must split before it grows. A star must die before it scatters light. Perhaps, in our violence, we were only imitating the universe's clumsy reflections of its endless cycle of birth and decay. But humanity's tragedy is awareness. We know what we do. We know that every blade, every bomb, every word spoken in anger is a choice. And still, we repeat it. Maybe it is because destruction offers clarity, a terrible simplicity that creation lacks. To build takes patience. To destroy, only a moment. And yet, even as the ashes fall, we rebuild. The instinct to create remains stronger, if only barely. Every era leaves behind its paradox. The hands that built cathedrals also forged chains. The same cities that gave birth to philosophy gave birth to conquest. Our greatest works stand beside our greatest wounds. But perhaps that is the truest measure of what it means to be human, to exist at the intersection of awe and ruin, forever caught between the dream and the debris. The same hands that painted caves also built blades. And perhaps one day, those hands will learn to choose creation without destruction, to wield fire without burning, to invent without erasing. For now, we remain both artist and arsonist, sculpting the world even as we break it. From this tension, from the ache of guilt, the tenderness of empathy, something new begins to stir. Out of the ashes of violence rises a gentler intelligence, one that understands survival differently. Progress, it turns out, is not measured by what we build or destroy, but by what we choose to preserve. Soon, from conflict will come compassion, a new survival instinct that no weapon can extinguish. Our greatest survival trait wasn't strength, it was tenderness. Before compassion had a name, it was already written in bone. In the ancient record, among fossils and fire pits, there are quiet miracles, the healed fractures of a broken leg, the worn teeth of an elder who lived long after they could no longer chew. These are not marks of chance, they are evidence of care. Someone carried that broken hunter, someone chewed that food and fed it to another. Long before the invention of mercy, humans were already practicing it. In a world ruled by tooth and claw, such tenderness was revolutionary. Every other species measured strength in speed or muscle, but humans learned that survival depended on something else: connection. Alone, we were fragile. Together, we endured. The weak were not abandoned, they were protected, and through that protection, the group became stronger. Empathy was not sentiment, it was strategy. It was evolution's most elegant trick, turning compassion into resilience. The evidence of this quiet revolution lies scattered across prehistory. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the skeleton of a Neanderthal was found who had been crippled since youth, missing an arm, partially blind, yet he lived for years. Someone must have cared for him, tended to his wounds, shared food. That single act defies the myth that our ancestors were brutal or cold. The truth is gentler and more astonishing. Before humans built tools of war, they built networks of love. This capacity to feel the suffering of another as one's own changed everything. It bound the tribe with invisible threads stronger than any wall or weapon. Fear united us against danger, but empathy united us against despair. Around the fire, when one cried, others comforted. When one died, others mourned. From those small acts came rituals, stories, and meaning. The tribe that cared survived, and the tribe that ignored did not. Empathy taught us time. It allowed us to imagine futures where others mattered. The hunter who shared food with the injured was not only kind, he was pragmatic. Today's mercy meant tomorrow's ally. Kindness became memory, and memory became inheritance. Those who understood this passed on not only their genes, but their humanity. The compassionate mind was favored by evolution, though it left no visible trace except the world we now live in. There is a strange beauty in realizing that our first moral code was written not in law but in gesture, the hand that lifted, the arm that sheltered. Before speech, empathy was our language. A touch could calm, a gaze could heal. Long before theology or ethics, there was this simple truth. To feel for another was to expand the boundaries of the self. In caring, the I became we. This shift reshaped not just society but consciousness itself. The mind that once thought only of its own hunger now carried the weight of others. That burden gave rise to morality, to art, to the yearning for meaning. To love, even in fear, is to defy extinction. Empathy transformed survival from competition into collaboration. It gave us the courage to face the unknown together, and in that togetherness, intelligence bloomed. Imagine the ancient healer kneeling beside a fevered child. They have no medicine, no explanation, only instinct. A cool hand, a whisper, a song. The act itself is enough. Care becomes cure. Across millennia, this gesture will echo through hospitals, sanctuaries, and lullabies. It will remind us that survival was never merely about endurance, but about grace. The world we built stands on countless such small kindnesses, most of them forgotten. Empathy was not weakness. It required extraordinary strength to feel in a world so harsh. To risk caring for another when death was always near demanded courage greater than any warrior's. It meant slowing down when every instinct screamed to run. It meant carrying someone else's weight when your own was heavy enough. Compassion was defiance, a refusal to let the coldness of the world dictate the shape of the heart. Over time, empathy became our compass. It guided behavior, shaped social bonds, and gave rise to shared morality. Even punishment and justice, in their earliest forms, were expressions of empathy's shadow, the need to protect the group from harm. Every moral system, every act of charity or forgiveness, grows from the same ancient root: the awareness that another's pain is real. Our ancestors did not have words for love or kindness, yet they practiced both instinctively. When the first child laughed, it was not just joy, it was connection. When the first mother sang, it was not art, it was reassurance. Every song, every touch, every story told to soothe a frightened child carried the same unspoken lesson: you are not alone. That lesson became the foundation of civilization. What began as instinct grew into philosophy. From empathy came ethics, from ethics came spirituality. To care was to see divinity in the other, to sense something sacred in the shared experience of being alive. The gods we later imagined, gods of mercy, healing, love, were reflections of this inner inheritance. Before religion taught compassion, compassion created religion. Our greatest survival trait wasn't strength, it was tenderness. We outlived the beasts stronger than us, and the predators faster than us, because we learned to protect what we loved. We learned that the heart could be as sharp as the spear, as enduring as the stone. And though time has buried our ancestors' names, their kindness survives in our gestures, in every hand that feeds, in every tear shed for a stranger, in every quiet act that defies indifference. It is easy to believe that progress came from invention, from fire and wheel and blade. But perhaps the true breakthrough was emotional, the moment one being reached for another, not for gain, but for care. In that touch, the world changed. The self was no longer alone. Life became shared. That was the real beginning of humanity, not the making of tools, but the making of trust. And so, amid all our wars and wonders, empathy remains our oldest and most enduring creation. It is the fire that warms but does not burn, the light that survives every collapse. When all else fails, this is what endures: the impulse to heal, to comfort, to understand. From empathy, a new kind of survival emerges, not of the body, but of meaning. The story will now turn toward this deeper endurance, how we began to preserve not just life, but purpose. History doesn't repeat, it remembers in fragments. If you could watch the story of the earth unfold from far above time, you would not see a straight line, but a heartbeat expansion, collapse, silence, and renewal. Mountains rise and erode, oceans advance and retreat, civilizations bloom and vanish. Everything that exists eventually returns to dust, only to take shape again under a new name. We call this destruction, but perhaps it is simply the rhythm of memory, the pulse of forgetting that makes remembering possible. Each generation believes it is the first to awaken, but the soil tells another story. Beneath every city lie the bones of another. Beneath every invention lies a forgotten echo. Civilizations are not lost by accident. They are dissolved by time, absorbed back into the great silence from which they came. Floods, fires, plagues, and stars, the agents of erasure are many, and all are patient. The world does not hurry to remember, for it knows memory must be renewed. Archaeologists uncover fragments of this endless cycle, shards of pottery, broken statues, worn roads that once led to glory. Yet for every trace we find, there are 1,000 more erased beyond recovery. The wind carries away what we build, and the earth hides what we forget. To study history is to chase ghosts across a collapsing bridge. We never find the full story, only its outlines, its shadows. The deeper we dig, the older the mystery becomes. Civilizations, like stars, die not in darkness but in brilliance. They burn too brightly, too fast, until the weight of their own creation collapses upon them. The Maya, the Indus Valley, the Olmecs, the Sumerians, each rose with breathtaking precision, then fell into quietness. Their knowledge did not vanish overnight. It slowly thinned, diluted by time and necessity. Languages fractured, stories blurred, rituals outlived their meaning. The descendants of builders became wanderers again, and the cycle reset. Perhaps this pattern is not a flaw but a design. Nature erases not out of cruelty but balance. Nothing can grow forever. Even memory must rest. Forgetting, in its own strange way, is mercy, a clearing of the slate, a moment for renewal. Every collapse frees the world to begin again. Humanity, too, seems bound to this rhythm, forever oscillating between knowing and losing, between ascent and humility. We like to imagine progress as a ladder upward, infinite, inevitable. But the truth is closer to a circle. The ancient world knew this well. The Egyptians spoke of eternal return, the Hindus of yugas, the Greeks of golden ages that decay into iron before beginning anew. Even the stones remember in spirals the slow curl of ammonites, the rings of trees, the orbits of planets. Time does not march, it dances. And yet, within these cycles, something accumulates. Not all is lost in the resetting. Some memories survive embedded not in monuments but in instinct. We inherit more than genes. We inherit impressions. The fear of floods, the reverence for the sun, the longing for paradise, these are not mere myths but residues of experience, echoes of worlds erased. The same stories appear across continents, because we are all remembering the same forgotten dream. Perhaps humanity has begun many times, in many forms. The myths of lost worlds, Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, may not be literal, yet they hold emotional truth. They speak to the ache of remembering something vast that once was. Science and story meet in this ache. Geology shows us the scars of extinction, while myth preserves the feeling of having survived it. Both whisper the same message that creation and destruction are one continuous act. If we are honest, we do not truly remember history. We reconstruct it. We fill the gaps with imagination and call it truth. But deep beneath our inventions lies a shared intuition that humanity is older than its records, wiser than its ruins. The earth itself is a library written in layers, each civilization a chapter overwritten but never fully erased. When volcanoes bury cities or ice swallows coastlines, it is not the end of the story. It is simply another turning of the page. Look closely, and you will see how forgetting fuels creation. After every collapse, humanity rebuilds with fragments of what came before, new myths from old memories, new gods from old grief. Even now, our skyscrapers stand upon buried temples. Our satellites trace paths once charted by forgotten astronomers. The continuity is hidden, but unbroken. We are the descendants of every dawn. And yet, there is something deeply human in our fear of forgetting. We carve names in stone, record data in machines, fill the skies with digital memory, all in defiance of entropy. But perhaps the universe does not fear forgetting. Perhaps it depends on it. For without loss, there can be no discovery. Without decay, no rebirth. If we remembered everything, we would stop evolving. The question is not how many civilizations have fallen, but how many have risen again and how many more will. The earth has survived countless extinctions and still sings. Humanity, too, carries this resilience. We are not only what we remember, we are what we rebuild after forgetting. In this sense, amnesia is not our enemy, but our teacher. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that beauty lies in transience. When we forget, we make room for wonder to return. When we lose the map, we rediscover the stars. Each ending clears the space for another beginning, and in that endless loop, meaning deepens. History doesn't repeat, it remembers in fragments. Each fragment is a seed waiting for rediscovery. Each ruin is a whisper from the future as much as the past. The fall of one age becomes the soil of another, and through it all, consciousness persists, reshaping, relearning, remembering itself through new faces. And now, as we look back at the ruins of those who came before, perhaps we are only seeing ourselves another civilization destined to rise, to forget, to begin again. For the past is never gone, it only changes its mask. Soon, the past and the present will dissolve into one another. The cycle will close, and in its silence, we will return to the beginning not as we were, but as what we have become. Your heartbeat is older than your name. It remembers the fire, the hunt, the storm. Long before language, before memory could take shape in words, something inside you began to listen. It has never stopped. Within every pulse that moves through your body lives a rhythm inherited from millions of years of survival, the steady drum of life enduring itself. You carry the echoes of everything that came before, the first breath drawn in fear, the first cry of triumph, the first silence of loss. You are not a new story. You are an ancient one, still unfolding. Modern life disguises this truth beneath its noise, but if you stand still, truly still, you can feel it. Beneath the hum of machines, beneath the heartbeat of cities, there is another rhythm. It thrums in your veins, in your breath, in the quiet intervals between thoughts. It is the same rhythm that guided your ancestors when they walked through forests of mammoth and flame. It does not speak in words, but in instinct, in the unspoken knowledge that you belong to something vast, old, and awake. Science calls it inheritance. DNA passed down like a sacred library, each cell a book filled with forgotten stories. But those stories are not only biological, they are emotional. They shape the way we move through the world, our fears, our longings, our wonder. The scent of rain before a storm, the comfort of firelight, the awe of the night sky. These are not random pleasures. They are memories older than thought, written in the invisible script of evolution. Your blood remembers the fear of open plains, when lightning split the horizon and predators moved in shadow. It remembers the relief of shelter, the miracle of warmth against cold. The flicker of a candle soothes you not because of its light, but because it echoes the fires that once protected your ancestors through endless nights. The thrill you feel when standing before a storm, the chill when gazing into darkness. These are not emotions of the present. They are instincts speaking through time. The body, in its wisdom, has never forgotten how to listen to the world. Your muscles tighten when danger approaches, though you cannot say why. Your skin responds to unseen changes in air and sound. Somewhere deep within the folds of your mind, the old animal still watches. It is the reason you dream of running, of falling, of flying ancient rehearsals for survival. Dreams are fossils of emotion, fragments of a language older than reason. But this inheritance is not only made of fear, it is also made of wonder. The reason we stare at stars is not curiosity alone, it is recognition. Those lights were our first teachers, our first gods, our first maps. Somewhere in the architecture of your mind, their patterns still live. Every time you look up and feel small, you are remembering how vast the world once felt when the sky was both home and mystery. Even love carries the fingerprints of prehistory. The warmth of another's touch, the comfort of closeness, the ache of loss, these were born when survival depended on trust. The instinct to protect, to nurture, to sacrifice. These are not moral inventions, but echoes of ancient cooperation, the inheritance of empathy that allowed the fragile to endure. You love because your ancestors learned that love was stronger than solitude. The tenderness that saves you now is the same that once saved them. Every emotion we call human is a thread woven through time. Our joy is older than laughter, our grief older than tears. When you mourn, you echo the first mother who wailed over her lost child. When you celebrate, you echo the first tribe that danced beneath returning light. Nothing you feel is new. Every heartbeat, every breath, every trembling of awe is a repetition of something sacred. We are each a continuation, not a beginning. And perhaps this is what it means to be human, to carry the infinite within the fragile. The past lives not behind us, but within us, folded into the double helix of being. Evolution is not only the shaping of form, but of feeling. The fear that sharpens your senses, the joy that opens your heart, the longing that drives you forward. All are inheritances polished by time. You are not merely descended from those who survived. You are composed of their survival. Listen closely, and you can still hear them. The hunter's breath in your own when you quicken your pace. The gatherer's patience in your quiet hands. the singer's voice in the hum that escapes your lips when you are alone. The pulse of life has been handed to you unbroken, like a drumbeat that has crossed every generation without pause. It is not metaphor. It is continuity. In moments of stillness in the hush before sleep, or the silence between thoughts, the ancestral pulse speaks. It tells you that fear is not failure but memory. That longing is not weakness but continuity. It whispers that you are never truly alone, for every life that came before moves within you, guiding your choices, shaping your gaze, steadying your steps. Even the parts of yourself you cannot name, intuition, instinct, déjà vu, are simply ways your ancestors continue to speak. Perhaps this is why some places feel familiar though you've never been there, why certain sounds draw tears you cannot explain. The body recognizes what the mind has forgotten. Beneath the skin, across millennia, recognition travels faster than reason. When the wind stirs through the trees or waves crash against stone, something inside you answers, I remember. Modern science has begun to glimpse this truth in its own language. Epigenetic memory, inherited responses to trauma and survival. But what the laboratory measures, the spirit already knows. We carry within us the shadows of famine, the calm of rain after drought, the thrill of reunion after loss. We are haunted not by ghosts, but by the persistence of life itself. Your heartbeat is older than your name. It remembers the rhythm of the hunt, the song of rain, the crack of thunder. It is a metronome set by creation, unbroken by extinction, unforgotten by time. You may call it DNA, soul, or memory, the name does not matter. What matters is that it endures. And though modern life often drowns this rhythm beneath clocks and engines, it never ceases. It waits in your quiet moments when you close your eyes, when you breathe deeply, when you remember for no reason at all. The ancestral pulse does not need your attention. It only asks for your silence. In that silence, the distance between past and present disappears. You become not a descendant, but a continuation, the living proof that nothing ever truly ends. So listen. Beneath the machinery of thought, beneath the noise of the world, your body keeps time with a memory older than civilization. Every beat is a message from before history. You are part of the endless, and the endless is part of you. Soon, that rhythm will fade into quiet, the final silence before the story's end, where all time collapses into a single breath, and humanity returns to itself once more. The world may change again, but the fire in us never truly goes out. Across ages and extinctions, through stone and smoke, through cities that rose and vanished, a single light has followed us. It began as a spark struck between stones, then as torches carried through dark forests, as hearths glowing in huts of clay, as lamps flickering in temples, and finally, as the soft electric hum that now fills our nights. Every era has called it something different: progress, knowledge, soul. Yet its essence has never changed. It is the same ancient flame, moving through hands and hearts, refusing to die. Look back far enough, and you can trace its path. It burns in the first fires that gathered the tribes, in the eyes that looked at stars and saw gods, in the stories whispered beside sleeping children. It glowed in the clay of Göbekli Tepe, in the obsidian mirrors of forgotten kings, in the libraries that burned but never truly vanished. It burned when the first words were spoken, when the first kindness was given, when the first question was asked. That question, why is the ember that will never cool? Every generation tends the flame in its own way. Some guard it with reverence, others scatter it wildly, letting it catch wherever it may. It has burned through our triumphs and our cruelties alike, illuminating both creation and destruction. For every artist, a warrior. For every healer, an inventor of weapons. For every cathedral, a ruin. And yet, through all these contradictions, the fire endures. Because what we truly protect is not the flame itself, but the meaning it represents, the will to continue, to wonder, to care. In every heart, that light flickers the same warmth that once gathered strangers close against the cold. It is what drives us to build, to remember, to forgive. Even when the world trembles, even when we forget what we were, the light returns. It hides within stories, within compassion, within curiosity. It never asks for worship, only witness. To be human is to keep the light alive, even when it burns low. Consider what we have become. Creatures who send fire beyond the sky, who light the dark not with torches, but with stars of our own making. We have taken that primal spark and stretched it into galaxies, into thought, into time itself. Yet, even as we touch the cosmic, we are still the same beings who once knelt before a campfire, watching shadows dance. We are still the children of light and fear. We have built cities of glass, but our hearts remain made of ember. The light is not only survival, it is remembrance. It carries every lesson, every loss, every tenderness that shaped us. When we hold a candle at a vigil, when we ignite a stove, when we gaze at the glow of a distant screen, we are performing the oldest ritual in the world. We are telling the darkness, we are still here. Through ice ages and empires, through the silence of extinction and the noise of progress, the fire has passed from hand to hand, a quiet defiance of oblivion. We are not its masters, we are its keepers. And perhaps one day, when we are gone, something else will inherit it, the light of curiosity, of awareness, of care. It may take new forms, speak in new languages, but it will still burn. Because light, once born, seeks no permission to continue. The flame is not only physical, it is the light within the mind, the awareness that sees beauty even in impermanence. It burns in art and thought, in the questions that refuse easy answers. It glows in forgiveness, in the way we love despite knowing loss is inevitable. That is the paradox of the fire. It cannot exist without consuming, yet what it consumes it also preserves. Every idea, every act of kindness, every memory becomes part of its glow. Humanity's endurance has never been about conquest. It has always been about preservation of warmth, of meaning, of one another. The fire that once kept us alive against the wind now burns in quieter ways. In compassion, in creativity, in the small grace of choosing good, despite the darkness. Our progress is not measured by what we build, but by what we keep alight. Even now, as the world grows louder and more uncertain, that same light waits in every one of us. The steady warmth beneath anxiety, the small hope beneath despair. It reminds us that we have walked through worse winters and risen from deeper ashes. The fire does not promise safety, only possibility. It says, continue. And we do. We continue to love, to build, to imagine. We continue to seek connection across the vastness. We continue to believe that something in us, the spark of wonder, the pulse of care, is worth carrying forward. The fire has always known the way, even when we do not. One day, perhaps, the world will change again. The cities may fall silent, the stars may grow dim, and time itself may fade into stillness. But somewhere, in some quiet corner of the universe, a single flame will remain small, patient, unafraid. It will wait, as it always has, for breath, for memory, for love to find it again. The world may change again, but the fire in us never truly goes out. It burns through our stories, our mistakes, our hopes. It burns through the dark, guiding us not toward perfection but toward presence. And as long as even one heartbeat echoes in that warmth, humanity endures. The flame fades now, soft and steady. Its light grows low but not lost a whisper, not an end. In that dimness, a question begins to form. If memory is the fire, what comes after remembering? Perhaps evolution's final stage isn't physical but the courage to remember. When the fires have cooled and the ashes settle into quiet, something still lingers. It is not smoke or ruin, not even memory in its usual form. It is something subtler, a vibration, a hum beneath silence, the faint warmth that refuses to fade. Every civilization, every heart, every brief flicker of existence leaves behind this resonance. It does not speak in language or image. It simply is. The echo of all that has been. We imagine endings as voids, but the truth is gentler. Nothing truly ends. It only changes rhythm. The light that leaves the flame becomes heat, then wind, then dust. The stories we tell dissolve into others. Even when we forget the words, their shapes remain in us. Humanity is not a sequence of beginnings and endings, but a continuous unfolding, a river passing through countless forms, never still, never lost. Perhaps that is what survival truly means. Not endless life, but endless becoming. We think of evolution as flesh, transforming bones, thinning, brains widening, hands reshaping the world. But the real evolution has always been within. It is the widening of awareness, the expansion of empathy, the deepening of wonder. It is not the body that continues to change, but the heart and the mind that hold its light. Our ancestors dreamed of immortality, but they misunderstood what it meant. To live forever is not to avoid death. It is to contribute something that outlives the self, a gesture, a kindness, a fragment of truth. Every act of compassion is a spark that joins the great fire of continuity. It does not matter how small it seems. The universe measures meaning in echoes, not empires. The long history of humanity, from the caves to the stars, is not a story of conquest but of remembrance. We have always tried to preserve what we felt was sacred: warmth, safety, beauty, love. These instincts, older than language, have guided every age. Even when we forget their origin, they remain encoded within us, the quiet inheritance of all who came before. We are the sum of everything that has survived, every kindness repeated, every lesson carried forward, every dream whispered in darkness has shaped the way we see. We are made of more than matter, we are made of memory, and memory, even when it fades, never truly disappears. It becomes intuition, instinct, the invisible compass that points us toward meaning. If you listen closely, you can still hear the ancestral pulse beneath the noise of the modern world, the rhythm of footsteps on ancient earth, the murmur of stories shared beside the first fires. It is quieter now, but it endures. It reminds us that we are not separate from the past. We are the past, walking within its future. We are both the dreamer and the dream. In this final light, humanity's purpose seems clearer. Not to dominate, but to connect. Not to escape the world, but to understand it, and, through understanding, to care for it. Our evolution is not finished. It has simply turned inward. It moves now through thought, through empathy, through the fragile courage it takes to remember who we are beneath all our noise. To remember is to resist the pull of forgetting, not just historically, but spiritually. It is to honor the brief miracle of being aware. Every age has faced extinction in its own form: flood, fire, silence, indifference. Yet through each, something has endured. A single melody, a single gesture, a single spark of hope. That is the thread we follow back to the beginning. That is the fire that never dies. And maybe that is what remains after the fire, not monuments or machines, but tenderness. The quiet strength to look at a fragile world and still choose to love it. The wisdom to see beauty even in impermanence. The humility to know that we are not the first nor the last to walk beneath the stars. We are simply the current keepers of the light, entrusted for a little while with the task of remembering. Even the stars themselves are temporary. They live, they burn, they fade, yet their light continues long after their deaths, crossing billions of years to touch new worlds. So too does our light, carried not through galaxies, but through compassion, imagination, and story. We shine because others once did. We endure because we remember. And so, the story does not end. It softens. The flame that burned through every chapter becomes a glow, steady, calm, infinite. The great noise of history falls away until only breath remains. In that stillness, we understand that humanity's greatest creation was never the tool, or the temple, or the language. It was awareness itself, the simple, trembling realization. We are here, together, for a moment that will never come again. Perhaps evolution's final stage isn't physical, but the courage to remember. To hold the weight of all that came before without despair. To know that the universe will forget us, and to love it anyway. To keep the light alive, even when there is no one left to see it. The story ends here, in silence not of absence, but of completion. The last ember glows softly in the dark, pulsing with all that has ever been. The fire, the fear, the love, the endless becoming. The flame fades, but beneath the quiet, the ancient heartbeat continues.